tonight's news edition. In a meeting with public figures, His Majesty the King says the economic challenge and raising the standard of living of Jordanians will remain the paramount national priority. The King says Jordan will continue support for Gaza and that world efforts should focus on resumption of Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. And a ceasefire in the Gaza war is holding as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under fire in Israel over the costly conflict. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King said the economic challenge will remain the paramount national priority. He told national figures during a meeting held at the house of former Prime Minister Ahmed al-Lawzi that raising the living standards of Jordanians has been his preoccupation and the focus of his directives to all governments. The King also stressed preserving state prestige and public property as a collective responsibility and said all assaults and violations should be dealt with according to the law. He also praised the awareness of all Jordanians of the higher national interest and the efforts of all official institutions, namely the legislative authority that endorsed a package of legislations. He noted the passage of legislation started with constitutional amendments that were followed by laws regulating political life that took the kingdom into an advanced stage and turned it into a regional model in reforms. King Abdullah said Jordan has always been capable of overcoming challenges with fortitude and determination. The King, he said, had succeeded on many occasions to turn challenges into opportunities thanks to the awareness and wisdom of its people and the readiness of its national institutions. King Abdullah said he is proud of the outstanding efforts of the armed forces and security agencies to bolster national stability and protect its higher interests. Jordan, he said, is a unique example of Muslim-Christian coexistence, diversity and tolerance, noting the country's effort to advance dialogue and moderation and the repudiation of violence and extremism. The King pledged in this context that Jordan will continue its historic role of protecting Arab Christians who are an inseparable part of our region's history and civilization in the past and at the present and in the future. Earlier, His Majesty the King said Jordan would continue to do its utmost to provide relief and medical aid to the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. He said the kingdom is beefing up the Jordanian military field hospital in Gaza and contributing to reconstruction efforts in the coastal enclave. At a meeting with a delegation of U.S. congressional aides at the Al-Husseiniya Palace, King Abdullah said that after the Israeli aggression against the Gaza Strip was brought to an end, international efforts should be focused towards the resumption of Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. His Majesty also spoke about the repercussions of the Syrian crisis on neighboring countries, as well as the situation in Iraq. He reiterated that Jordan backed a comprehensive political solution to the Syrian crisis and efforts to preserve Iraq's unity. Talks also dealt with ways to further boost Jordanian-U.S. ties, and the King thanked Washington for its support to the kingdom in various fields. Members of the delegation praised Jordan's efforts to deal with various challenges and bring about peace and stability in the Middle East. Minister of Education Mohammed Nebat said the government is committed to meet 5 of 6 demands made by teachers who are on a general strike. He told the lower house's Education Committee that the teachers' professional allowance cannot be fulfilled as it will add further burdens to the Treasury, which is reeling under a huge deficit. The meeting discussed various alternatives for teachers to end their strike. The head of the House Education Committee, Deputy Mohammed Qatache, said the government's obstinacy had brought the negotiations to a deadlock. In addition to the pay raise, the Jordan Teachers Association is demanding changes to the civil service bylaw regarding sick leaves, promotions and leaves without pay, investigating the Education Ministry's pension fund, and referring its case to the judiciary. Jordan welcomed a comprehensive ceasefire in Gaza between Palestinians and Israel, which went into effect last night. The cabinet stressed during today's session, chaired by Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour, that the truce will help save the lives of innocent Palestinians. It said the opening of border crossings between the Gaza Strip and Israel, a move that coincides with the ceasefire, will accelerate the delivery of humanitarian relief aid and the access of construction materials into the coastal enclave. The cabinet also noted the political and diplomatic efforts of His Majesty the King with all concerned parties to bring an end to the Israeli aggression. A ceasefire in the Gaza war is holding as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faces strong criticism in Israel over the costly conflict. On the streets of the battered Gaza Strip, people headed to shops and banks trying to resume the normal pace of life after 7 weeks of fighting. Thousands of others who had fled Israel's bombardment and sheltered with relatives or in schools returned home to nothing but rubble. In Israel, sirened warnings of incoming rockets fired from Gaza fell silent. But media commentators voiced deep disappointment over the government during the most prolonged round of Israeli-Palestinian violence in a decade. We'll get more details in this report.
It's an uneasy peace. Day 2 of a ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians saw locals in Gaza venturing out onto the streets, trying to restart lives stalled by 7 weeks of fighting.
I don't know what to do. I do not know where to go. I put some of my things at a friend's house, but I do not have a house. I don't know where to go. I have 10 children, and I don't know where I should go.
For locals, a reopening of borders, particularly the Rafah crossing into Egypt, is an encouraging sign. Still, many in Gaza, which bore the brunt of the damage and casualties, more than 2,100 according to local officials, are cautiously optimistic.
We can't trust Israel's agreements, but we hope the truce will last.
Israelis living across the border have mixed feelings.
If the ceasefire works so that really there is quiet and Hamas is not able to rearm themselves and something is put in place so that they are demilitarized, then I think it's a good thing. I think everybody is tired and needs a rest and needs to get back to a normal life.
The whole miftzah didn't solve anything. We're back exactly where we were before. It's my opinion, as long as they don't want peace, we're not going to have peace.
I mourn the 70 dead Israelis who were killed in vain. I'm ashamed that my government gave in, raised a white flag and surrendered to a group of terrorists that don't have planes, tanks, or an organized army, who taught the Israeli government a lesson.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under fire from members of his coalition government over a costly war in which there was no clear winner.
Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour will represent His Majesty the King at the inauguration of Turkish President-elect Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Mansour arrived in Ankara for tomorrow's ceremony. Meanwhile, incoming Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu said membership of the European Union is a strategic target for Turkey and will be pursued decisively. In a speech to a ruling AK party of President-elect Tayyip Erdogan, whom he was set to replace as party leader later in the day, Davutoglu said the country's foreign policy would remain multifaceted. Setting out his vision for Turkey ahead of his expected appointment tomorrow, the new prime minister said his country needs a new constitution with a liberal character. Davutoglu said he and Erdogan would serve together without discord.
Turkey's foreign policy has become multidimensional, and it will continue to be multidimensional. This is a must in our geography. Those who want to trap Turkey between Asia and Europe are ignorant of Turkey's geography. Turkey's EU membership target is a strategic one and will be pursued decisively.
Germany said it is in discussions with the United States and other international partners about possible military action against Islamic State ISIS group in Syria. But Berlin made it clear it will not take part in any military engagements there. Meanwhile, Islamic State fighters took control of a key Syrian government airbase in the northeast. This report has the details.
Militants have expanded their reach into large part of eastern Syria and northern Iraq in recent months. But in a report, the United Nations investigators accused the militant Islamic State in northern Syria of waging a campaign to instill fear, including public executions and whippings. The investigators also said Syrian government forces have dropped barrel bombs on civilian areas, a war crime under international law. The head of the UN panel said he was concerned about the fate of boys forced to join ISIS training camps. He said the United States should take the presence of those underage into account before launching any airstrikes.
Among the most disturbing findings in this report are accounts of large training camps where children, mostly boys from the age of 14, are recruited and trained to fight in the ranks of ISIS along with adults. To what concern ISIS, the Commission, as you can read in the report, indicates that members of ISIS have committed war crimes and crimes against humanity in Aleppo and al-Raqqa governorates, including acts of torture, murder, enforced disappearance, and forcible displacement.
In their latest gains, ISIS fighters said they seized war jets, anti-tank missiles and other weaponry when they took control of Tabqa Syrian army base near Raqqa city in Syria. Sources said Syrian government soldiers were taken hostage and some were executed. Another militant group, the Nusra Front, is also reported to have taken control of a border crossing on the line dividing Syria from the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. The opposition Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the militants captured the Al-Qunaitara post from Syrian government forces. An Israeli soldier was injured when stray fire hit the Golan. The Israeli military said it struck back with artillery fire at 2 Syrian army positions. Shelling from the Syrian civil war has occasionally reached into the Israeli-occupied Golan, sometimes causing injuries and damages. Hibal Atoum for the News at 10.
A U.S. writer freed this week after being held captive for 2 years by Syrian insurgents thanked those who had worked for his release. Peter Theo Curtis, who was held by Nusra Front, said he was emotionally overwhelmed by his welcome home. Curtis said he had no idea while he was imprisoned that there had been hundreds of people around the world pushing for his release. His release on Sunday came against the backdrop of other efforts to free other U.S. hostages in Syria as the United States considers possible options, including airstrikes, to target the Islamic State organization. Ukraine accused Russian forces of launching a new military incursion across its border. A Ukrainian military spokesman said a group of Russian soldiers had crossed the border in armored infantry carriers and entered a town in the east, not far from where Ukraine detained 10 Russian soldiers on Monday. The captured Russian servicemen said today they mistakenly crossed over into Ukraine and were weary of the fighting. Moscow has repeatedly denied sending weapons and soldiers to help the eastern rebels. It says the captured men had crossed an unmarked section of the border by mistake. Today's accusation came a day after Ukrainian and Russian leaders agreed to work towards ending a separatist war in the east of the country. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko told supporters after his talks with Russian leader Vladimir Putin that Ukraine had managed to unite the world in its support as it battles pro-Russian separatists. Tens of thousands of people armed with 140 tons of plum tomatoes took part in the tomatina by splattering each other in the Spanish town of Bunol. The town hall, which lies just inland from Valencia, spent some 30,000 euros on the fruit and dumped it on the streets for the chanting masses. This is the second year that participants have had to pay a 10 euro ticket to be able to take part in the fight. Truckloads of vitamin C and fiber were soon parade on the streets and covered the walls and people with red smears. Roger Federer launched his bid for an 18th Grand Slam title with a 6-3, 6-4, 7-6 win over Marniko Matosevic to ease into the second round of the U.S. Open. A five-time U.S. Open champion, Federer never appeared threatened by Matosevic, but Australians still forced the Swiss maestro to work up a sweat in front of a center court crowd that included basketball great Michael Jordan. Federer broke his opponent once in each set, but in the third, finally broke back, forcing it to the tiebreak, which the Swiss won by clinching the final 3 points. In the women's division of the same tournament, Serena Williams started her quest to join Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova in joint fourth place on the career Grand Slam list with a 6-3, 6-1 victory over 18-year-old fellow American Taylor Townsend. And finally, fair tonight in most regions with light to moderate winds. Tomorrow, temperatures continue to be above their seasonal average. Therefore, it will be relatively hot across the country and hot in the Badia and Jordan Valley. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a warm night and hot day tomorrow with northerly moderate winds and slightly choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. In a meeting with public figures, His Majesty the King says the economic challenge and raising the standard of living of Jordanians will remain the paramount national priority. The King says Jordan will continue support for Gaza and that world efforts should focus on resumption of Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. And a ceasefire in the Gaza war is holding as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under fire in Israel over the costly conflict. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.